How does someone with $1 million deal closing tomorrow not think to book an earlier flight? I was sitting at the airport gate, minding my own business when the announcement came through. The flight was overbooked. They needed volunteers to give up their seat. Compensation was $800 plus a hotel voucher. I had a job interview the next morning. I stayed in my seat. That's when the businessman appeared. He was wearing an expensive suit and carrying the energy of someone who had never once been told no and fully intended to keep that streak alive. He tapped my shoulder and told me I should volunteer. He had $1 million deal closing tomorrow and needed to be on that flight. I told him politely that I had an important interview and couldn't give up my seat. His face turned red. Did I know who he was? He flew first class every week. I looked like someone who could use $800 more than he needed the hassle. I said no again and put my headphones back on. He sat down right next to me. He said he was trying to be nice, that my interview could be rescheduled, but his deal could not. I told him he knew nothing about my situation and asked him to leave me alone. He laughed and pulled out his phone. What company was it? He probably knew the CEO. He could make one call and get me a better position than whatever I was interviewing for. I got up and moved to a different seat across the gate area. He followed me and sat down again. Other passengers were starting to notice. He began talking loudly to anyone who would make eye contact. Could they believe this? He had offered to help and this guy was being completely unreasonable. A woman with kids nearby asked him to keep it down because he was being disruptive. He turned to her and said he was trying to solve a problem. Then he went to the gate agent and I heard him ask if they could just bump me since I refused to volunteer. The gate agent explained that was not how volunteering worked. He came back with a smirk and said the gate agent had suggested he negotiate directly with passengers. I told him the gate agent had absolutely not said that and he was lying. His voice got louder. He had been flying for 20 years and had never met someone so stubborn. He pulled out his business card and waved it around announcing he was a senior partner at Donaldson and Associates. Nobody cared. He kept waving it anyway. He started approaching other passengers one by one asking if they would volunteer and pointing at me, saying he wouldn't do it so maybe they would. A college student told him to leave me alone and volunteer himself if it was so important. The businessman snapped back that he was in first class and couldn't be bumped. It had to be someone from economy. The college kid laughed and told him to deal with it. He started pacing. He pulled out his wallet. Fine, 1,000 cash right now. Just take the voucher. I told him his money couldn't buy my seat and that he was being incredibly rude. He started counting out $100 bills in front of the entire gate area. $1,500. Final offer. People were openly staring. He came back to me looking increasingly desperate. $2,000. That was more than I probably made in a month. I stood up and told him he was being disrespectful and needed to stop harassing me. That was when the elderly woman across from us looked up from her book. She said if his deal was so important, perhaps he should have booked his flight earlier instead of harassing strangers. His face went bright red. He stammered that this was unbelievable and that he was going to report all of us. Then he stormed off to the gate agent, one final time demanding to speak to a supervisor. When the supervisor arrived, he started screaming about incompetence and how he was going to have people fired. The supervisor calmly asked him to lower his voice. He got louder and jabbed his finger toward her face. She said, "Sir, I need you to step back and calm down or I will have to call security." He laughed in her face. Did she know how much money he spent with this airline? She picked up her radio without breaking eye contact. "Security to gate 12, please." He was still talking when the security officer arrived, still explaining his deal, still describing his importance, still counting the years he had been a loyal customer. The security officer guided him firmly toward the exit. "Sir, you are no longer welcome at this gate." I boarded my flight on time. I got the job.